Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today in Malmo, Sweden, visiting Aimpoint and taking a look at all of the guns of Aimpoint's firearms division, which is in fact right here. Aimpoint's firearms division had one gun. So Aimpoint was founded in 1975. It was a combination of an idea by a Swedish inventor named Arne Ekstrand with the financing of a wealthy Swedish entrepreneur by the name of Gunnar Sandberg. They combined to produce in fact, I have it right here, Aimpoint Electronic red dot optical sight. Both of these guys were actually avid moose hunters, and they thought this could be a really cool alternative new sort of sighting system. So they put together, they found the company Aimpoint, and in 1978 or 1979, Arne comes across this firearms designer by the name of Bertie Johansson, initials CBJ, which you may recognize. We'll come back to that in a moment. Johansson has this idea for a cool, new, modern, unique firearm, sort of a personal defense weapon, intermediate cartridge, not quite pistol caliber cartridge. This is actually chambered for .221 Remington Fireball. And Arne thinks it's a good idea. He shows it to Gunnar, who has the money, and Gunnar thinks that does in fact look pretty interesting. He's into advancing technology and decides to bring on board CBJ Johansson as well. And Johansson becomes the director of Aimpoint's firearms division in 1978-79. He was, in fact, the entirety of Aimpoint's firearms division. At that point, it was a very, very small company just working on developing and introducing this first red dot sight. So Johansson gets to work, and in between 1979 and 1980, he makes his first prototype of the gun for Aimpoint, and it is this one. He did, in fact, only ever make one of these guns, and we have it right here to take a look at. So it is a pretty interesting it's a short stroke gas-operated rotating bolt system, but the entire action is self-contained and completely symmetrical around the barrel. The gas piston has sort of shades of Czech VZ52 to it, but the bolt is a pretty interesting, unique design. So Johansson tests this out. They go looking, well, I'll tell you what, we'll talk about where this went in a moment, but first, let's take it apart and show you how it actually works. All right, we'll start with receiver markings here, made by Aimpoint in Malmo, Sweden, caliber .221 Fireball, and this is prototype number 1. So Jeff Cooper designated this the PC-80, the police carbine model of 1980, but that's really just a name that he came up with for his article on the gun. It doesn't really have a designation because it was a one-of-a-kind manufacturer, and it didn't end up going any farther. So as it's currently set up here, it has a 16-inch barrel, which was important for easily importing it into the US. Underfolding stock. So in order to fold this, we are going to push in on this latch button, pull the stock down. Then it rotates up under the gun, and we have a spring-loaded tab right here. Push that in. I can fold the butt plate down, and it collapses nicely like that. This, of course, is sort of the civilian semi-auto version. This is, by the way, semi-auto only. They did, of course, have plans for a military pattern that would have the barrel cut off right about here and be selective fire. All right, in terms of controls, it is top ejecting, so that's your ejection port. The charging handle is a pair of handles here on the front. It's important to note at this point that the gun was developed for iron sights. At the time, there weren't really any red dot sights out there except for the brand new Aimpoint, and that was still sort of a developmental work in progress. So the rail here was added at some point. Cooper's article actually has pictures of him shooting this one, with an Aimpoint Electronic on it, but this rail blocks the iron sight, so I'm not sure if they had a different sort of rail attachment on it in 1980, or if they just unscrewed the rail completely. You can see it's got a couple of screws here that hold it on. Anyway, the Aimpoint 5000 that's on it today is not correct to when it was originally manufactured, and the optic kind of gets in the way of the charging handle because you have to pull this back. So what I found is that the easiest way to charge it is to reach up underneath the action, grab these two, and pull them back, like so. There is no manual safety on it. There is no selector switch on it. Remember, this is a prototype. Had it gotten into production, it would have had both of those features. And then the magazine release is here on the back of the grip. It is a very large grip, very sort of Desert Eagle-y. It does have a rubber sleeve around it, which is kind of nice. And it holds the magazine inside the grip itself. So actually looks very much like a Desert Eagle magazine. This is a single stack 8-round capacity magazine. Like I said, it is chambered for the 221 Fireball cartridge. This fires a 50 grain, in this case, soft point projectile, 223 caliber projectile, at about 2,400 feet per second. And magazine holds 8 of them. They did make a double stack magazine for it, the location of which is unknown at this time, but you can see that there are blocks here on the front and back of the magazine. So it would be very easy to make a double stack mag for this, had production gone beyond the first one. The rear sight is a drum that rotates through 3 different options. You've got a small aperture there for more precise shooting. You've got a wide open, there we go, wide open big V notch for quick close range shooting. And then you've got a smaller, more precise aperture for longer range. All right, disassembly starts with a pin here that holds the fire control group onto the main action of the gun. This is a little tight, so I'm just going to tap it out with a plastic punch. So with that pin out, I can slide this back and it'll pivot down. There we go. And now you can see the action here. So this is technically a bullpup firearm because the hammer's here behind the magazine, the trigger is up in front of the magazine. It has a pretty good trigger to it though because the connecting bar is this, let the hammer down here for a moment, this nice hefty solid bar. So there's not, you don't get a lot of flexibility in that. It's a simple hammer fired semi-auto system. So when I pull that bar back, what I'm doing is pulling this sear forward, which is going to release it off of the hammer, allows the hammer to go up, and then this is our disconnector. So the bolt's going to go forward over that, push it down, which forces the hammer to recock when it goes back. So not much going on there. Now moving on to the rest of disassembly, the original idea was that the rear end cap of the tube here, the receiver tube, has a keyway in it. However, and you're supposed to rotate this key up to this position and then it will slide out. However, the tab that locks it in place has actually broken off over time, which suggests to me that there's perhaps the bolt was going a little faster at end of travel than they had anticipated, and it was probably battering on this. There is a rubber buffer inside of this guy. This is a brand new one that Aimpoint just recently had put in because the original had turned into, well, it hardened and then turned into powder. So rear end cap there. Now you may be expecting the next step is to pull everything out the back. It is in fact not. Everything comes out the front of the system. So to remove it, we actually have to remove this cross pin, which is locked in place by the front sling swivel. Pull that off. And then that pin comes out. With the pin out, we then disconnect the recoil spring by pushing in this tab and lifting what is essentially a top cover, which is pretty cool. So the recoil spring is located up here. It's connected to the charging handles right there. And then this lug drops into that hole in the bolt assembly. So we lift this up and then we can pull everything out the front of the gun. Like so. So this has a gas piston here, it's an annular gas piston, definitely reminiscent of the Czech VZ52. When you fire, that goes back just this short little distance. You can see the beginnings of gas rings there, which we'll get to in just a moment. It pushes back this. This, of course, has the hole where the recoil spring lug locks in. When this starts to move back, it's going to rotate these two action bars, which are connected to the bolt, which is all the way back here. So that's actually the firing pin at the very back. When this moves backwards, you can see it's going to unlock these two bars from the locking lugs on the top and bottom, like that. Then this element can cycle all the way back. It will eject the empty case straight up out this ejection port. And then the recoil spring connected to this hole pulls the whole thing forward again, and at the end of travel, rotates it to lock in place. So we can pull this apart a little bit farther by lifting out this lug. You may be wondering, by the way, what prevents, when this goes back, what prevents the whole barrel assembly from just going backwards? Well, it's this. The pin that we took out here goes through this lug right there, which locks the barrel assembly into this receiver assembly. Lift that off, and then we can move pieces free on the barrel. Now, to take this completely apart, what we would have to do is take off the muzzle device. This has been cranked on really tight, and so we're going to leave it on, but I can move all the bits out to the end of the barrel here to show you. So, spacer. That is essentially, this is the one end of the piston, and they have this interesting helical rubber seal on it. So under high pressure, that seal is going to compress, expand, well, compresses this way, expands that way, seals gas in, which forces the gas tappet to go backwards. Once pressure has dropped a bit, once the bullet has left the barrel, pressure on this drops and gas is vented forward and out the barrel. So there's the gas tappet. There's the gas port. It's drilled in at an angle a little bit like that. And then with those off, I can rotate this forward, take this guy off the back. So this is the bolt. These are its locking surfaces, right there and right there. These two cam lugs operate inside this guy, so that's what forces it as it goes back and forth. Those two lugs are what force it to rotate to lock and unlock. Looking up inside there, you can see the ejector there, and there's an extractor at the top. And then this is the firing pin that's going to protrude forward when it gets hit. So the firing pin, I think, also probably acts as a little bit of a buffer when the bolt hits its end of travel. This whole thing is the barrel, so it's a 16-inch long barrel, and the whole gun's a bit short because it's in bullpup configuration. It's got the locking surfaces, or the other half of the locking lugs added onto it here, not machined on, but as a separate component, fitted onto the end of the barrel, and of course chambered for 221 Remington Fireball. All right, one thing I want to point out here is it's pretty cool that all of this is located axially around the barrel. We have a gas system like this on, say, the Czech VZ52, and of course the German G41s use similar sorts of annular gas pistons, but all of those guns will connect this annular piston to a much more traditional single op rod, usually on top of the barrel, and a regular sort of bolt carrier. What CBJ did was make the entire thing basically symmetrical around the barrel axis, and that's a cool design element. Also, worth pointing out here, on the camming cylinder, there are actually two control holes. So of course this is where the lug in the recoil spring fits, and you'll see it's a round lug here with a square lug at the base, and that is because the round lug fits in this, and the square lug fits down inside here in the barrel itself. But there are two of them cut into this component, and you'll notice that this one is pretty close to this marker line. This one's a little farther forward. This is where Johansson was experimenting with dwell time, because the farther forward this is, the sooner this is going to start moving and unlock the bolt after you fire. And so he ended up going with this slightly longer lock time, or slightly longer dwell time, which means the system remains closed and the bullet moves down out the barrel for a slightly longer time before this starts to unlock. One other thing we can do here at the end is actually pull out the firing pin. So to do that, I'm going to push it forward and then push down on that. There we go. Oop. So that's the detent spring that holds it in place. That's the firing pin. That's the firing pin spring. And that is the plunger ejector. So he actually designed this such that it's going to go in like that. The firing pin and the ejector use the same spring. Now, apparently that's an element that Bill Ruger particularly liked, but we'll get to Ruger in a minute. You may be wondering about the choice of cartridge, 221 Remington Fireball. Well, remember this is like 1978, 79 when he starts working on the project, and there aren't a ton of necessarily common PDW cartridges out there. This is not being done with the cooperation of a major ammunition or major firearms company, and so Johansson had to pick a cartridge that was readily available on the commercial market. 221 Remington Fireball is. It is sort of 5.56 light, so this is a 50 grain bullet at about 2,400 feet per second, which, by the way, is also a little bit underpowered and sometimes has difficulty fully cycling the action of this carbine. But one of the other choices that was considered was 30 carbine. I don't know the exact rationale why he went with 221 instead of 30 carbine, but 30 carbine was obviously something he was aware of and considered. It had just been higher velocity, seemed the more futuristic, more forward-looking choice. I think today this makes a pretty decent analog for 5.7 by 28 or 4.6 as sort of a PDW cartridge. It's a little more powerful than those two, but it was readily available in 1980, and that's probably the most important element to it. All right, and there you go. There is the Aimpoint PDW. Perhaps possibly sometimes called the PC-80, all field stripped. All right, and what better to do with this, since we have access to it and a shooting range, than actually do some shooting. So we have some 221 Remington Fireball here that I will load up. Magazine holds 8 rounds, single stack. There is a little bit of taper to these cases, not much, but enough that the follower is actually running in a track that's not quite exactly parallel to the body of the magazine, and that is so that the follower maintains the correct angle with the stack of the cartridges so they feed reliably. So like I said, the easiest way I found to do this was to put one hand underneath, grab both of the charging handles, and bring it all the way back. There we go. In battery. All right, here we go. Didn't quite eject. Like I mentioned, this ammo is actually just a little bit underpowered for the gun. Yep, same thing. So it's interesting, it's got a fair amount of concussion, although part of that is the fact that we're at an indoor range, but it's got very little actual felt recoil. The gun itself is a little bit on the heavy side, like a lot of prototypes. There's a lot more metal in the parts than there would be in a final production version. Part of the process of going to a final production model of a gun like this is making it more efficient, getting rid of the excess weight where you don't need it. And very first prototype, you haven't done any of that. But between the weight and the relatively low power of the ammunition and that action, it's really comfortably soft shooting. All right, we actually have a chronograph running, and those are averaging 2398 feet per second. So I said 2400 for 21 Remington Fireball, and that's exactly what it is. All right, let's try a little bit more. It's too bad that this isn't cycling, because, man, the rounds that do are very comfortable. Like that. That is really nice to shoot. Yep, last round, and it ate the case. That's a really nice gun to shoot. And I only loaded 7, and they all ran very nicely there. All right, let's go back and talk about what actually happened to this. All right, so in 1980, they have their one prototype gun, and it's kind of clear that Aimpoint as a company doesn't have the infrastructure to actually manufacture a firearm in any sort of large quantity. They're still a quite small company. And so the two engineers, Arne and Johansson, or Ekstrand and Johansson, go looking for a partner to get into this business, as well as a market for the gun. They weren't going to sell a lot of these in Sweden. Kind of the natural place to sell something like this is, of course, the United States. So they make a 16-inch barrel for it, and they head over to the United States. They talk to Bill Ruger, which in 1980 seems like a fairly good choice. Ruger thought it was a cool idea, but wasn't apparently interested in doing any manufacture. They also talked to Jeff Cooper, and in fact, in the October 1980 edition of Soldier of Fortune, Jeff Cooper wrote a brief review of this exact gun. It's kind of cool. The article has pictures of Cooper shooting this one. Now, naturally, Jeff Cooper used this article as a means to decry the use of tiny little pipsqueak cartridges like 5.56 and 221 Fireball. And his takeaway is that this is a cool system, and part of what makes it cool is it could be easily rechambered to 44 Automag, which is a much more sort of Jeff Cooper cartridge. But that, alas, did not ever happen. They weren't able to find a specific partner for this particular gun, but Johansson ended up collaborating with a guy named Frank Congers, who had a company called Weapon Systems. Sounds like sort of kind of a con artist type, but the two of them hit it off. There seemed to be a lot of potential. And it became clear by 1981 to Sandberg, who was the financial head behind Aimpoint, that the optics division was the better bet for this company. The firearms division wasn't really going anywhere fast. So Aimpoint and Johansson parted ways amicably in 1981. Aimpoint retained ownership of the patents of this system, but Johansson was released to actually move to the United States for 7 or 8 years and work for Weapon Systems, where he did some other weapons development. Weapon Systems wanted him to just basically copy this, but evade the patent. And he wasn't willing to do that, which is kind of cool. Instead, he developed some other systems for them, which didn't end up going anywhere. And by '89, he moved back to Sweden. And as I said at the beginning, you may recognize those CBJ initials. Today, he is still working on firearms development, and in particular has a 6.5 by 25 millimeter cartridge, a necked down, saboed, armor-piercing cartridge that has some pretty cool elements of its own. We'll cover that in a separate video, but his first firearm development was actually for Aimpoint, and it's this. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Big thanks to Aimpoint for giving me access to the one and only surviving prototype of this piece. Thanks for watching.